Bradley,
Yes.
you play screenwriter Don DaGradi
Yes.
in the movie. How did you approach making him real and relatable, and were any of the materials in the archives helpful?
They were incredibly helpful. I mean, we had the tapes, which were an amazing document of the entire experience. And we all had, even if we weren't playing him, we all had Richard Sherman, who knew him, could describe the relationship between Don and Walt, and between Don and the Sherman brothers. He was a huge resource. We wouldn't have been able to do this without him.
Now, BJ, you had the task of playing the more introverted, sort of serious of the brothers Sherman. How did Richard help you in that way?
Well, when I first talked to Richard, I was afraid that maybe he would have a biased view towards his brother. In fact, it was the opposite. He had such a generous, multifaceted view that he really helped me understand what Bob was going through, who he was, and why he expressed himself the way that he did. He had been in World War II. He had been shot in the war. He had seen some really horrible things and had a real gravitas to him. So he wasn't patient and wasn't interested in mincing words. He knew they were good songs. He wanted to fight for them. And he was in contrast to Jason's character, Richard Sherman, who was much more of a sunny, optimistic guy.
And Jason, you do a wonderful portrayal as well of Richard Sherman. And how was he a wonderful resource to you?
Well, you know, just for the record, for all of us, like Bradley and BJ said, he was on set every day and so willing to give us any piece of information that he could find in his mind. I mean, he has access to every memory that ever. I mean, it's incredible the way his brain works. But you know, for me, a really important thing that I was able to get from Richard was his music, and playing his music, or attempting to play his music in the style in which he really did it in 1961. Because if you get like a Mary Poppins sheet music book, that's sort of a simplified, more generic version of the final product. And John Lee Hancock wanted the music to be played in their raw, more unfinished, unpolished versions. And so in order to accomplish that, Richard gave me access to all of his demos of all of the music. So I listened to those, and my piano teacher transcribed them all. And so I learned all of those songs, and you know, without Richard, I wouldn't have been able to get access to the more private side of his music.
So we have the outgoing one, the serious one, and where did you fit into that trio as Don DaGradi?
You know, this was a huge shot for Don. Walt had, as he did with a lot of people, mentored Don and was bringing him up a huge notch to screenwriter from animator. And according to Richard, you know, Don had to kind of manage the room and make sure that these guys were protected, but that we got the job done. So I thought of him as sort of a baseball manager, kind of trying to keep things moving forward.
So Jason, you talked about having the musical background that Richard has. And how were BJ and Jason, you guys, similar to the real-life Sherman brothers as well?
Well, I mean, we've talked about just that. I think naturally it was good casting on their parts, not even to do with like acting or anything, but just like naturally my default, like I am outgoing or gregarious.
And I'm quiet and always thinking about what I'm going to say, and I think when people see me thinking, they're like, oh, he's kind of the more serious one. So I think we make the same first impressions that the Sherman brothers made, for sure.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, maybe I differ from my real life character only in that, like, I feel like Richard truly is like the glass is half full, and it's gonna work. And everything's personally, I'm more like nervous and, you know, self-loathing.
But it was fun to play brothers in that. Whenever I told people that I was going to play Jason Schwartzman's brother, they were like, oh, that's perfect. I think we're similar enough but different enough that you can see us as brothers. At least that's what John Lee Hancock told us, and I'm sticking to that.
Is there a favorite scene that any of you can recall, or a couple favorite scenes, and why?
My favorite scene is dancing with Emma. I loved being able to do that whole dance sequence with her.
I love watching the scene with Walt Disney and Emma in the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And Walt's speech. It's just very, it's beautiful, and it's just a really great example of good acting.
There's a running thread in the movie of the backstory to Emma's character, where you see her played by this little girl and Colin Farrell as her father that she keeps flashing back to. And we never got to see any of that when we were filming because it took place in a totally different time. So to get to see the finished movie, I think we were all watching that with fresh eyes, and I was amazed at how powerful that stuff was.
Yeah, Colin Farrell's so good in the movie.
And so is Annie.
Yeah, Annie as well. And Rachel Griffiths and Ruth Wilson.
Not Ruth Wilson. Really disappointed me.
And you.
Totally kidding.
Perfect.